A crusty loaf, crumbs of clues, and a criminal unmasked. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host. Let's spice up this tale. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. Your thoughts add zest to the story. It all kicked off with a baguette, not some poetic metaphor, but a real, crusty French loaf, the kind that makes Nero Wolfe shut his eyes and mutter in Latin when it's baked just right. This one, though, wasn't delivered by Fritz with reverence and linen. It arrived wrapped in panic and perfume, clutched in the arms of a woman who hit the doorbell at 10:13 a.m. in 2 hours and 13 minutes too. Early for Wolfe's tolerance of doorbells or drama. I opened the door because that's in my job description. Right between chasing killers and needling my boss. What I didn't expect was a woman in navy slacks, silk blouse, sunglasses too big for the weather, gripping a baguette like it was a court summons. She didn't wait for an invite, gliding past me into the front room with the ease of someone who's dodged 100 receptionists, that 30-ish. Jittery, she wore a scent that cost more than my suit. "I'm Claire Dalrymple," she said, scanning the room like she expected the orchids to pat her down. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe." "That makes two of us," I said, "but only one of us might get that wish before lunch. Still, I admire your grit. That loaf evidence? Or are we just carb loading for the feels?" She blinked and flashed a smile like she'd dusted it off for the occasion. "It's from Lanier. It's symbolic. Everything in this house is symbolic," I said, taking the baguette and giving it a once-over like it might tick. "Follow me, Miss Dalrymple. Step lightly. The last guy who tracked dirt in here hasn't been heard from since 2017. I led her to Wolfe's office as usual. He was parked in the only chair in Thurald. It seemed to have accepted its destiny, a 7th century monstrosity off black leather, and Patience Wolfe didn't look up from his book as we entered. That was normal. He acknowledged guests the same way a glacha acknowledges kayakers, sir. I say we've been visited by carbohydrates and complicationness. Claire Dalrymple would like to disturb the sanctity of your morning with a mystery. She brought pastry well bred. Technically same family. Wolfe turned a page. It is barely morning. She insists it's symbolic. I added, setting the baguette on the corner of his desk, like it was about to testify that. Got his attention. Wolfe looked up, taking in Miss Dalrymple with the quiet distaste of a man forced to acknowledge variables. He shifted in his scare, which was equivalent to a standing ovation in our household. "Miss Dalrymple said your entrance is premature, your offering is presumptive, and your presence is uninvited. Why are you here, I believe," she said, steadying her voice. "Someone used this baguette to send me a message. Bread is rarely used for communication." Wolfe replied beyond its more primitive expression. "Hunger. It was placed in my car front seat, wrapped in yesterday's stock report from Remsen and Greavy." She removed a thin clipping from her purse, specifically an article detailing a series of unauthorized trades that cost the firm over $6 million in client accounts. Thigh work adhere in internal compliance. Wolfe reached for the paper, as if retrieving an insult from the air. High scanned mine, narrowed. "Did you report this?" I asked. "No, not yet. I feel right. Someone wants me to find something." "Shut up." "Which is it?" I said. "That's why I'm here," she replied, folding her arms. Wolfe leaned back. Thepper fluttered to his desk like a fallen leaf. "I abhor puzzles that use food as metaphor," he muttered, "but I will take your case." I turned to look at him. That was fast, even by Wolfe's rare impulsive standards. "You're taking this one?" I asked. "Based on stale bread?" "Andinundo. There is nothing stale about this," he replied. "Fritz does not purchase from Leaner." "I do, of course," I said. And here I was thinking we'd finally hit a case driven by moral curiosity. Wolfe ignored me. "Mister, Orimple, I will require a complete list of personnel at Remsen and Greevy, with access to the article before its publication. Names, roles, tenure, also the identities of any individuals with both financial motive and personal grievance. Mr. Goodwin will collect the stata. I nodded. Yes, sir. I'll also interrogate the Baguette in case. It's harboring secrets. Wolfe closed his book. This matter has the scent, he said, of subtle manipulation. Someone wishes to provoke. Let us oblige them. And just like that, the brownstone was disturbed not by murder or mayhem, but by something far worse. In Wolfe's universe, an enigma dressed in starch, and secrecy interrupting breakfast. I had the feeling it wasn't the Baguette we'd remember, but the hands that left it, and what they were trying to say without saying anything at all. There's a particular flavor of tension that comes from watching. Nero Wolfe pretend not to be intrigued. His mouth tightens just a little. He adjusts his reading position by exactly half an inch, and most telling off. All he listens without interrupting Miss Claire Drimple, as it turned out, was just the appetizer within. 36 hours of her Baguette bearing visit. The brownstone saw more foot traffic than a Times Square subway platform, not that. Wolfe welcomed it, had tolerated it like root rot in an orchid pot. But the moment Claire's typed dossier of the next morning, via messenger bound in navy ribbon, no less I knew were in it for the long haul. It began with the names, 4 of them, 4 people eat. Remsen and Greevy, who had reason, motive, opportunity, and that whisper of psychological grind to want Claire silent. Or complicit Wolfe had me read them aloud while he decimated a plate of sourced quail and black trumpet mushrooms. Fritz Claim took 4 hours and 3 minor miracles. Gerald Doril, I read senior portfolio strategist Ivy League pace when he talks. Fired once, rehired by executive necessity, suspicious taste. In wristwatches, unpleasant Wolfe. Muttered next to set, Vale PR director, polished connected. Came from cosmetics. She and Claire have had friction over some internal memos flagged as embarrassing friction. Wolfe said an inadequate word for enmity, wrapped in cordiality. 3rd Calvin Stowe. I waited. That's his actual name, Junior. Analyst good at math, bad at discretion, recently disciplined for unauthorized reporting, but retained duetto, exceptional algorithms. Algorithms, Wolfe grunted an excuse for idiocy in decimal form. And finally, Junior Merriman. I said head of risk, practically invisibly according to Claire, rarely seen, never spoken to directly, who reports through intermediaries, keeps his door locked from the inside. Wolfe dabbed at his lips. So a strategist, a manipulator, a meddler, and a ghost. Sounds like dinner theater, I said, except one of them might be trying to ruin Claire's career, or worse, ruination is a matter off course in finance. Wolfe replied, but the gesture, the Baguette, the article thedeming, it is not vulgar sabotage, it is courtship of complicity. Someone wants her to act. Yes, Wolfe said, but whether to silence, assist, or confess, we don't yet know. That was Wednesday morning. By Thursday, they started coming. First was Let Vale. She didn't call first, she just showed up, which is either very brave or very stupid. When it comes to the brownstone, I caught her leaning on the door frame like it was a cocktail bar, flashing a business smile designed for investors and hard liquor. She was mid-30s, magnetic in that curated way, and wore a perfume that could be weaponized in small elevators. I'd like to speak with Mr. Wolfe, she said. I assume you're Reyes' person. I am. I said I'm also the guy who notes, who barges in without an appointment. What's your angle? Her smile widened. No angle, just a mutual acquaintance. Claire mentioned she was consulting you. I'm concerned you don't say. She did right into Wolfe's office. Minutes later, where she performed the world's quietest confrontation, Wolfe didn't speak more than 3 sentences, just enough to remind her he knew why she was there. I only want to make sure Claire isn't overreacting. she told him, crossing her legs. With perfectiming, it's an intense environment. People get paranoid, and some, Wolfe said, provoke paranoia to test boundaries. She went quiet. Wolfe stared. I cleared my throat and offered coffee. She declined, left, and didn't look back. By Friday, we had visitors. 2 and 3 Calvin. Stowe arrived like he'd been kicked out of a server room. He was twitchy, angular, and talked in fragments. Didn't sit, didn't blink much either. Claimed he just wanted to clarify a few points. Claire might have misunderstood. Also mentioned ethical nuances and accidental access. Wolfe listened, nodded once, and dismissed him with a single word: document. After he left, Wolfe shook his head, guilt without strategy. He said, useless. The final guest delivered like a late parcel was J. Marmon. He did not speak. He sent a representative, a young man in a slate suit and a sharper haircut, who handed Wolfe a sealed letter and refused coffee conversation or oxygen. The letter was typed, precise, cold. Wolfe read it aloud in his best funereal baritone to Mr. Wolfe. I am aware of your inquiries. They are misplaced. I suggest discontinuation. The matter does not concern your client's welfare, but her inability to recognize internal procedures. We will not indulge further speculation, Junior Marmon. I raised a brow. That's not suspicious at all. Fate is something worse. Wolfe said, it is deliberate indifference, the performance of authority. Mr. Marmon has acknowledged game and refused to play by its rules. Do we press harder? No, Archie. We with someone has blinked. Someone will panic. That night, the brownstone settled into its usual quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that prickles the back of your neck. Something had entered the sanctum. Something cold, calculating, and almost invisible, and Wolfe, for all his calm, had already leaned forward half an inch in his chair, which meant the storm was coming. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking like you just interrupted a seance. That's what stepping into Remsen and Greavy felt like. Friday morning, a lot of glass, a lot of gray, and an ambient tension to choke a golden retriever. I was there. By Wolfe's orders to flesh out the suspects, see them in their natural habitat where panic wears a tie and guilt hides behind spreadsheets. Claire had arranged a visitor's badge for me, said I was a consultant, which was generous, and I took the elevator to the 18th floor where the magic supposedly happened. If magic involved risk models, asset pipelines, and people with the charisma of an ice cubist, first office on my list belonged to Gerald Dorrell, the senior portfolio strategist. He had a window view and a treadmill desk, which should have been enough to convict him on character alone. He caught him mid-stride typing something that probably passed for brilliant in quarterly memos. Mr. Dorrell, I said. Archie Goodwin. Claire mentioned I might stop by. He gave me a once-over thin brain Temple's crisp suit, a watch that could time a neutron star. Yes, he said. She said someone was assisting her. I assumed it would be an attorney, not a private operative. I'm versatile, I said, sitting without bias. So let's be honest, Mr. Dorrell. Claire's under pressure. Something's going on in this office that makes people think baguettes and newspaper clippings are legitimate communication tools. He narrowed his eyes. If Claire is feeling paranoid, she should consider the implications of making enemies. This is a high-stakes environment. We don't leave welcome baskets. You were let go 3 years ago, then rehired. That's public record. Sure. What isn't public is who pulled the strings. Word is your performance had it something about ill-timed reallocations, and yet you landed back here. Smooth, he exhaled through his nose. You've got an insinuation, not a question, right? You think Claire is fabricating danger. I think Claire has become Eretich's thorough, maybe too thorough. She chases ghosts in data streams, and Chef forgets that everyone here is expendable. He turned back to his screen. It was dismissal. I didn't mind. He'd already told me what I needed. That Claire wasn't the only one worried about exposure. Next up was Lit Vale. Her office was 3 doors down, all minimalist. Decor and scented air. I knocked, walked in, and she looked up from her laptop with a smile that could deflect a lawsuit. Mr. Goodwin still poking around habit. I said, "I'm told you." And Claire weren't exactly trading birthday cards. Her smile cooled a degree. Claire is a compliance officer. She believes everything has a rule. I work in perception. It doesn't always align. Perception can be expensive. When it slips, I said, "Some of those internal memos you edited," Claire flagged them. "Yaukno that I edited for." Tone not content, and yet some of that content disappeared entering. She stood, walked to the window. I have nothing to hide if Claire believes it means threatening her. I suggest she look closer to home, being she spends more time at her desk than anyone else in this place. She knows where the bodies are buried, because she picks the shovel. She turned. Let me be clear. Mr. Goodwin, I don't play games with bread and clippings, but if someone wanted to send Claire a message, it wasn't meant to scare her. It was meant to remind her how close she's gotten to what. Let's smiled again, asked Calvin. That was convenient. Calvin Stowe's cubicle was on the 17th floor in a bullpen of analysts who looked like they hadn't seen natural light since college. I found him hunched over 3 monitors, sweating slightly. "Mr. Stowe," I said, "got a moment?" He didn't look up. "Already talked to your guy." Wolfe humor me. He sighed, hit a key, and turned. He was younger than I remembered, maybe 27, but already carried the wear of someone aging. From the inside out, Claire's been digging into a reporting discrepancy. Hesed a trailing variance in the forward hedge data. I helped her run the back inquiries. That's it. That all well. Maybe not go on. He hesitated 2 weeks ago. I ran a shadow batch. Overnight, Claire said not to save it, but I kept a copy. It showed a pattern, small deliberate shifts in projected returns, tucked between legit accounts, but no signature. No access logs. Yeah, I think someone's cooking books. I think someone's redirecting. Flow on a scale that would be impossible unless you knew exactly where to look. Who knew you ran that batch? He swallowed. Just Claire, that wasn't good. I leaned in. Did you tell anyone else? He shook his head. But 2 days later, someone accessed my workstation remotely. Just once, nothing stolen, just a footprint in the log file. I didn't report it. Why not? Because I want to keep my job. He looked away. I left him with a warning. If this ends up being bigger than variance math, you'll want to have told the truth early. The last suspect, Junior Marmon, remained a void. His door was closed. His assistant said he was traveling Zurich, maybe, or just unavailable. I wasn't buying either. The man ran risk for a firm with $7 billion under management and didn't appear in the building. For days that stank, but what I did get courtesy of a very chatty intern named Luke was that Merriman had been flagged 6 months ago. During an internal review, Claire had supposedly led the review, but the details were hushed. Luke heard whispers of conflict, of interest, discretionary ether, and my personal favorite, soft breach. By the time I left Remsen and Greavy, I had enough to fill Velf's evening with 6 varieties of aggravation. Back at the brownstone, Hugh was in the plant room with Theodore fondling orchids and fuming at their inability to bloom faster. I gave him their port, verbal of course. He doesn't read files if he can extract it from me over beer. When I finished, he said nothing, just stared at the ceiling. Finally, Marmon will be our pivot. You think he's the one. I think he is the absence. We cannot ignore these others. Vale stall, but Merriman withdraws. Leave a vacuum, and in a place as calculated as finance vacuums attract manipulation. He stood, which in Wolfe speak is the equivalent of a cavalry charge. Archie, he said, someone is tampering with fiduciary systems to exploit technical blind spots. The baguette was an act of conscience or fear from Claire. No, Wolfe said, from someone else, someone who knows she's getting too close. The message was not meant for her alone. It was also for us to move, to observe, to follow. Trail before someone decides to close the case by removing the evidence, Claire included, It sat in the air a moment then. Wolfe added almost to himself. Have Saul Panzer clear his calendar? I nodded. You expecting trouble? No. I am expecting precision trouble is merely the aroma. There's a moment in any good con where the seams start to show. The key is knowing where to look and having someone like me to do the looking. Wolfe may be mine behind the curtain, but I'm the guy in the trench coat outside the building, asking questions, pretending not to understand finance, which for the record isn't entirely pretending. By Saturday morning, I had Saul Panzer on standby and a thermos of Fritz's Corey-laced coffee in me. And Wolfe had decided our next move was triangulation. Hit the suspects with a mix of visibility and confusion, stir the pot, see who bubbles. He assigned them 2 targets, Gerald Doral and Lisette Vale. Saul would tail Calvin Stowe, whom Wolfe suspected was either a pawn or a panic button. As for Merriman, the man still hadn't emerged from wherever he was ghosting around Zurich Bees or Theft Dimension. Wolfe had Lon Cohen poking the press wires for a lead. In the meantime, it was up to me to lean on the people who were still breathing the same Manhattan air. I started with Doral. I found him at an espresso bar in Midtown that catered to hedge funders who dressed like they were above capitalists while still owning 3 condos. He was wearing gym gear and AirPods, but he wasn't sweating, just holding a lat like. It had hurt his feelings. I sat across from him. Before he could protest, Mr. Goodwin, he said, removing own earbud. Is this an ambush or a social call? Depends, I said. Are you stilling through your teeth, or are we about to get friendly? He didn't answer. I leaned in. Someone planted that baguette in Claire's car with the stock report for a reason. You want to explain why she's the one catching heat while someone's playing Houdini and with internal ledgers? He sipped, composed. Let me guess. He said, you think I'm orchestrating a cover-up to protect my comeback. You think I'm paranoid and auto scare a compliance officer with artisanal bread. I think I said you're the kind of guy who keeps his hands clean while the interns do the shoveling. He laughed short, sharp. You're wrong about me. I was brought back for a reason. Results. But Claire, she's a problem. She doesn't understand discretion. She runs audits like witch trials. You think people here appreciate that? I think someone appreciates her enough to try and shut her up creatively. I dropped a photo on Theatable, a still frame from one of Saul's shadow jobs. Calvin Stowe leaving Claire's building Thursday night. No bag, no folder, just nervous energy and a hood. To recognize him, I said. Doral barely glanced. Calvin's a servant, but he's scared of his own code. If he's involved, it's because someone's using him. It was an admission, and Doral knew it. You ever wonder, I said, if it's not about the money? He blinked. What else? Would it be Boot that told me everything I needed? Next stop, Let Vale. She was at Allness event. Something involving kombucha branding and financial empathy caught her just as she was finishing a panel, surrounded by people who probably used synergy in casual conversation. Archie, she said, you're stalking me now, just seeing where ethics goes on weekends. She smiled, still charming, still intrusive. We found a corner booth at a nearby cafe where she ordered green tea, and I ordered a sandwich that had more adjectives than ingredients. I didn't waste time. You edited out parts off that internal memo. The one, Claire flagged. That's not just smoothing tone, that's obstruction context. She said there were redundancies, legal phrasing, nothing material. Claire disagreed. Claire doesn't understand strategy, you know. I said, if Claire gets taken down, someone like you steps right over the wreckage, or that compliance heat disappersedly, your version becomes the official one. She leaned in. You think I want Claire gone? Think you want her quiet for a second? Something flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone. I don't scare people with bread. I manage reputation, Iberry problems. Yes, but quietly, efficiently. This mess, it's too loud, too messy. That's the second time someone said, This wasn't their style. I said so, host. Style, is it? She didn't answer, but she didn't look surprised when I showed her the photo of Calvin either sulkled me at 3:15 p. Got something. He said Stowe met with a courier behind the Lex 58 deli, past a thumb drive. One of those metal ones with the swivel cap, can you get it? Working on it. He left it in the courier's bag, but I have eyes want me to lift it. No. I said, let's not spook them yet, just tail the courier. See where it lands. Copy that gave us a new angle. Data moving hands, not just whispers. Wolfe would love that I return it to. The brownstone around 5 Wolfe was in the dining room, dismantling a terrain that had required Fritz to threaten several vendors. I gave him the rundown when I got to the part about Stu's exchange with the courier. Wolfe paused mid-coup. He said, the thread, you think it's the smoking gun? I think Wolfe said it is the first overt move Hoover's been. This has decided to extract something before Claire finds it. And if she already has, then she is in danger, Hested Archie. We must retrieve that drive. But carefully, I want you to shadow thicker rear tonight. I will instruct Saul to observe from a distance. We must see notably who receives the drive, but who expects not to that 8:30 that evening. I was across the street from a townhouse in Grammar, with a courier, middle-aged, sharp shoes, sharper walk, had parked himself. He didn't enter the building, just waited at 8:47 a town. Car pulled up. Guess who stepped out? Junior. Marmon alive apparently, and very much trying to stay invisible. He approached the courier, spoke briefly, and took a small object, probably the drive. Then he vanished into the building. I called Wolfe. He's not in Zurich. I said, no. Wolfe replied, he is preparing an exit. The question is, does believe he has time? Back at the brownstone, Wolfe summoned Claire for a late-night consult. She arrived, palate clutching her satchel like it contained the Ark of the Covenant. What did you find? Wolfe asked without greeting. She opened her bag, trembling slightly. This, he said, was left in my inbox. No note, no subject, just a data set. She handed over a printout. Wolfe read. His eyes narrowed. What is it? I asked. A list of shadow trades. Wolfe murmured, shell accounts, derivative structures, all careful inward, and one name appearing consistently in oversight protocols. Appointed Junior. Merriman. Claire nodded. I think someone tried to warn me before Merriman realized it was missing. You still have the source file? She shook her head. It was scrubbed after I printed it. Gone. Wolfe stood. Then we must move quickly because someone just lit the fuse, and the man holding the match is no longer content to stay in the shadows. Wolfe has 2 immutable rules: no clients before lunch, and no tampering with the brownstone on Monday morning. Somebody evaluated both. No, not in the usual sense. No one rang the bell. No one bursting with a pistol or a purse full of secrets. No, this trespass was quite clever, and as I discovered around 8:20 far more personal. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when Fritz appeared in the doorway of the front room, frowning like he'd just found a mouse in his missing place. Mr. Goodwin, he said, the kitchen has been altered. I followed him downstairs. The kitchen was spotless as always, copper pans, gleaming, counters immaculate. But when Fritz opened the tall spice cabinet, I saw it instantly. The saffron was gone. Now that might not seem like much to you, but let me explain. Wolfe doesn't allow improvisation with ingredients. The saffron, Spanish deep red, stored in a sealed amber jar, was positioned with surgical precision between the juniper and the star. In some ways it hadn't been misplaced. It had been moved. Fritz checked the drawers, the pantry, cellar shelf. Nothing. Did you use it yesterday? I asked. No. He said it was unopened for the boy best next week. Anyone else been in here? No, not even Theodore, which left one possibility. Him had entered the kitchen after hours. Someone with access. Someone one knew what they were doing. I informed Wolfe. Immediately, he was in his office pruning the dead leaves off a potted fern. His response was, "Not loud, but deadly. This is sabotage," he said. "Could just be theft," I offered. "I mean, it's saffron, not plutonium." He turned to me with the look of a man who had been personally insulted by the laws of nature. "It is violation," he said, "intentional, targeted, and symbolic." That was the word again, symbolic first. A baguette now stolen saffron, someone wasn't. Messages in a language. Wolfe couldn't tolerate disruption. I did a sweep of the brownstone. Nothing else was touched, no drawers rifled, no files moved, but in Wolfe's universe, the absence of fingerprints was more alarming than the presence. This wasn't a robbery, this was psychological warfare. At Wolfe's request, I changed all the locks, double-check, checked the alarm system, set up a small camera in the kitchen, hidden behind Fritz's spice rack, pointed right at the cabinet. That afternoon, Claire returned. She looked exhausted, hair tied back, circles under her eyes, like parentheticals on a confession. She brought a USB drive and a thin sheath of notes. I traced metadata, she said, placing the drive on Wolfe's desk, the anonymous file it originated on. Remsen's internal compliance server, my own subdirectories copied. It wiped the logs, then restored the originals clean, almost perfect, almost. Wolfe echoed. They left the timestamp behind. She said 2:47 and 2 nights ago. That system requires biometric access. And who has clearance? I asked. She hesitated. Me Merman, one vacuum panelist, Stowe Wolfe asked. She shook her head. He doesn't have the clearance, but he might have found a way around it that would be foolish. Wolfe muttered, but not out of character. Fritz brought coffee. Wolfe ignored it. "Miss Dalrymple," he said. "Do you know of anyone? Anyone who might be aware of this investigation, beyond those you've named?" She looked down. Then, "I told someone off the record, a friend, my sister. Actually, she's in PR freelance. I needed someone outside the firm to help me understand if I was reading too much into the edits. Let made you shared internal material, only that one memo. She promised not to share it." Wolfe sighed. Even confidences have choose. I watched him fall silent, staring at the USB drive like it had insulted his mother. Then abruptly, he turned to me. "Archie, check the camera footage from last night, every frame." I headed upstairs. The kitchen cam had stored about 9 hours of footage. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and scanned through it frame by frame. The first 6 hours were uneventful. Fritz prepping late-night pastry mess, sneaking a cookie, lights out by 11:42, but at 2:39 and the kitchen lights flicked on, and there he was, Calvin Stowe. No hoodie, just slacks, a button down, and a key card. He slid through the side door, bypassing the main entry. He moved quickly, too quickly to be confident, went straight for the spice cabinet, removed the saffron jar, paused, looked around. Then he placed something in its place. It froze the frame. It was a folded slip of paper. I bolted to the kitchen and yanked it open. The cabinet tucked behind the turmeric. The note, it was thin cream, colored, typed in 12-point Courier font. "Stop digging. The real theft isn't money, it's leverage. This doesn't involve you. Leave it buried. No signature, no fingerprints." But one thing was clear. War officially passed breadcrumbs. This was a direct threat. I brought the note to Wolfe. He read it, then read it again. Leverage, he muttered, could mean blackmail. I offered, or internal manipulation, a hostile acquisition or extortion through engineered loss. Wolfe said perhaps Merriman uncovered something, and instead of reporting it, used it. To what end? To make someone pay, Wolfe said, or obey. Claire stared at the note. Her hands trembled. "I need to go," she said. "There's a meeting tomorrow. Merriman's supposed to return, but if he's back already," Wolfe interrupted, "you will not go alone. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you from the lobby." I raised an eyebrow. "Nice to be volunteered." Wolfe turned to me. We are being maneuvered. He said someone is trying to shake our balance. That note was not just a warning. It was a test of how far they must go to silence her Claire. Left a few minutes later. Wolfe remained still in his chair, chewing his lower lip, a rare sight that evening. Saul called again the courier who gave Marmon the drive. He said I followed him to Ecoop in Soho. Guess who walked in 20 minutes later? Let fail, I guessed Bingo stayed. 15 minutes left with a manila envelope unmarked that told me everything and nothing. I returned to the kitchen. The empty saffron jar still sat in the counter. A simple theft, a quiet trespass, and a message. Hidden behind turmeric. Wolfe didn't say much the rest of the night, but I knew what was coming. Something in his expression had shifted. The line had been crossed. Tuesday dawned like a hangover, dull, slow, and sour, with aftertaste. The brownstone is quiet, but not the good kind. Wolfe didn't speak. Over breakfast, he barrelaged his eggs, which is how you know something's rotting beyond the refrigerator. The note had rattled him. He'd never admit it, not from fear. Wolfe doesn't fear threats, but from the implication someone had walked into his home uninvited and delivered a message beneath his nose that wasn't just a violation of property. It was a personal affront to the entire theology of his existence. At 9:15, Saul Panzer arrived. Wolfe had summoned him with a single sentence the night before. Bring your kit. That meant surveillance, counter-surveillance, and if necessary, a high little untraceable intrusion. Saul entered quietly, gave me a nod, and followed Wolfe into the office. I trailed Ben with a notebook and a feeling that today was going to require either a very long walk or a very short fuse. Wolfe sat at his desk like a man preparing to duel. Mr. Panza, he began, we are under pressure. That's for your default, isn't it? Saul said dryly. Wolfe ignored their mark. Someone entered this house. They replaced a jar of saffron with a typed threat. Mr. Goodwin has recovered the footage. You will study it, confirm the man's identity, then follow him again closely. Stowe asked. Yes, he may be porn, but is not acting alone if someone is directing him. I want to know who and how. Saul nodded, and the woman. Wolfe narrowed his eyes. Let Vale visited the Samba courier, who passed the drive to Merriman. He said she carried away a manila envelope. We do not know what was in it. Must got it, as Saul left the office to review the footage. I turned to Wolfe. You think Let and Merriman are working together? I think Wolfe said that the verage requires scale. Blackmail of one person is clumsy, but blackmail spread like a virus through data, reputation, and legal exposure is efficient, and I believe a Merriman is orchestrating such efficiency. And Stowe Wolfied, a tool, an intelligent one perhaps, but tools break. Merriman may already be considering how to discard him. That afternoon, Claire called. They canceled the meeting, she said, her voice clipped with nerves. Merriman sent an internal memo through encrypted channels. Claimed he's taking a sabbatical for strategic redirection. Effective immediately. Let me guess, I said. No return date, no forwarding contact. Correct. Did you tell anyone about the note? No, she said. Not even HR. They're already suspicious of my inquiries. One more whistle blown, and I'm out the door. I relayed this to Wolfe, who grunted. He's vanishing. Wolfe said, not fleeing, vanishing. There's a difference. Which says, one leaves smoke, the other leaves mirrors. Around 4 Saul returned from surveillance. Stokes getting sloppy. He said he met someone in Riverside Park. Older guy, dark coat, note in the company directory. They didn't exchange anything visible, but Stowe left with a white envelope tucked under his arm. What was in it? Wolfe asked. Couldn't see, but I followed him back to his apartment. He shredded the envelope, then flushed the pieces. Amateur. Wolfe muttered. Guilt makes people conspicuous. What about Merriman? I asked. Saul shook his head. No hits. He checked travel manifests, private flight logs, even ferry terminals. If he left town, he didn't do it above board. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Then he's still here or nearby. and likely watching us that evening. The second breach. Happenetti was returning from a quick trip to the corner, for milk Fritz had forgotten to restock when I saw. The front door wasn't locked. I hadn't done it. Fritz swore. He hadn't. Wolfe hadn't left his chair, and the alarm system still active, no alerts. I searched the house, nothing missing except in Wolfe's office. A single orchid lay on the floor. It had been removed from its pot, not broken, not crushed, just placed carefully face down on the carpet like a ritual. When I told Wolfe, he didn't speak for a full minute, then called Fritz. Fritz confirmed it. The orchid had been in the south corner, near the window of Phyopedilum. Rare, fussy, slow to bloom. Wolfe had been nurturing it for 6 years. Wolfe picked it up with surgical care, repotted it, and returned to his chair. No, they play with symbols. He said they believe we are outmatched. I sat across from him. I hate to say it, but they're moving fast, faster than we're used to. They are airing. Wolfe replied, speed invites error, fear sharpens it, and Wolver left. That orchid believes we will misinterpret the gesture. You don't, he do not. He tapped his fingers twice on the desk. Someone inside Remsen and Greavy has built a lattice of liability using insider trades, false audits, and planted reports. They have manipulated Stowe, they have corrupted Merriman, and they have attempted to pressure Miss Dalrymple into silence and veil Wolfe's Gaza sharpened. She has motive but not mastery. If she's involved, it is reactive, not strategic. The phone rang. Wolfe gestured for me to answer. It was Claire. They Ferretten, she said, effective, immediately cited breach of discretion and unauthorized transfer. I swore. Wolfe stayed silent. They had security escort me out. She continued, I didn't even get to pack my desk. Were you expecting this? I asked. No, but I think Merriman anticipated I'd dig too deep, and the other's veil hasn't said a word. Doral. He looked almost relieved, and Stowe wouldn't look me in the eye. Wolfe took the receiver from me. Miss Dalrymple, he said, do nothing further tonight. You are being isolated to discredit your testimony. Let them think they have succeeded. I don't understand, she said. Why would they fire me now? Because Wolfe replied, they believe your silence is now a formality. She paused a bit. It isn't, she said. No. Wolfe agreed. It isn't. That night, the brownstone went into lockdown. All access roads sealed, windows secured. Fritz kept a cleaver by the bread box, and even the orchids seemed to be watching the door. Wolfe remained in the office until midnight, drafting a series of letters. One to Lon Cohen, one to a judge he'd played chess with in the 1980s, one sealed and unsigned, addressed simply to Jerem. I didn't ask what that one said. Wolfe didn't offer, but I knew the storm was gathering. We weren't just exposing a financial scandal anymore. We were interfering with a system, one that had depended on silence, complicity, and carefully cultivated fear. The second breach was their last warning. The next move would be ours. The thing about Nero Wolfe is that he doesn't pace, he doesn't fidget ring hands or indulge in theatrical suspense when Wolfe is preparing to make a move. He sits perfectly still, so still you start to feel like you are the one moving too much. That's how I knew the next morning as he sat in the office with his fingertips lightly touching and his gaze fixed on the doorway that he wasn't thinking. He was waiting. By 10 o'clock. Wolfe had issued a set of instructions with kind dev precision you'd expect from a man who arranges his socks by both color and emotional tone. Mr. Goodwin, I require a telephone call, he said to Mr. Gerald. Doral's subject an offer. Now, if Wolfe is extending anything resembling an olive branch, you can be sure it's dipped in arsenic. I dialed Doral's direct line at Remsen and Greavy. He picked up in 3 rings. This is Doral Gerald? I said. Archie Goodwin. I work for a man who says can make your problems go away. There was a pause. I don't have problems, Mr. Goodwin. Well, I didn't say you have them. I said he can make them go away. Different thing. The kind of difference you only notice when your name shows up on a subpoena. You're bluffing. I gave him a moment to consider the cost of assuming I was. Then Mr. Wolfe will see you at 11 o'clock. He hung up without answering. Wolfe didn't smile, but I could see something shift in his posture. A microscopic lean toward satisfaction. At 10:57, Doral arrived, same sharp suit, same wounded pride, under-polished cool. He carried a leather folio. Beckhouse, of course. He did. I showed him into the office. Wolfe looked at him like one might look at a salmon that slept into a bear's mouth. "Mr. Doral," he said, "you are aware of Claire Dalrymple's termination?" "Yes, you are also aware of the internal audit she initiated." "Yes, and yet you did nothing." Doral sat folding his hands on the folio. "Because it was handled internally." "No," Wolfe said, "because it threatened you." That got his attention. Wolfe continued, "You made decisions with the firm discretionary. Funds that required multiple signatures. Yet those transactions were funneled through Shadow accounts under the oversight of J. Our Marmon, that is not normal practice. Doral stared at him, eyes narrowing. "Who can't prove that?" No, Wolfe said calmly. "But Mr. Stowe can. And unlike you, he is frightened." Frightened men leaked. Doral's fingers twitched. The folio in his lap seemed to grow heavier. "What do you want?" "Cooperation," Wolfe said. "You will confirm to me privately the extent of Marmon's operations. You will identify the accounts, and you will ensure Miss Dalrymple is not further harassed or compromised." "And if I don't?" Wolfe blinked slowly. "Then I will make it public that you authorized false quarterly disclosures, and I will have Rowan at the Gazette verify them with time-stamped financials. Your firm has already buried." Doral stared then. Almastine perceptibly nodded. "There's a name," he said, "Cloverdale Holdings. Look at their Q4 position. It doesn't match their real assets. That's the tip of it." Wolfe gestured toward me. I wrote it down. "And let Vale?" Wolfe asked. Doral hesitated. "Wasn't involved in the trades," he said. "But Merriman used her, fed her documents, had her sanitized language. He called it perception filtering. She thought she was cleaning PR. She was really laundering risk complicity through trust." Wolfe murmured, "How quaint." Doral stood. "You've got what you came for." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "you just bought yourself a fraction of deniability. Whether you maintain it depends on your continued utility." Doral left without another word. Wolfe sat back. "Mr. Panza," he called, and Saul stepped in from the front room. "Follow Dell," Wolfe said. "Let's see where his guilt leads him." Saul nodded and disappeared. Wolfe turned to me. "Now, Miss Vale, summon or bait?" "Neither," he said. "We misdirect." He scribbled a short note, sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to me. "Deliver this to Let Hand, only say nothing, then watch." I crossed Midtown to Remsen and Greevy. Let was in Hereford, manicured as always, perched behind her desk like she was waiting for a photo shoot. I handed her the envelope from Nero Wolfe. She read it, blinked once, then she stood, smoothed her skirt, and said, "Is he expecting me?" "I think he's expecting something." She left. 10 minutes later, I trailed her from a discreet distance, down Park Avenue, past a florist and a wine bar, and straight to the Co-op in Soho, same building where she'd picked up the envelope from Thackeray. Only this time, she didn't go inside. She waited at 3:14 p.m. Men Junior Marmon emerged from the side door. No briefcase, no disguise. Just a man trying to walk fast enough to outrun his own decisions. Let intercepted him. They spoke for less than a minute, and she handed him a phone, hers presumably. He glanced at it, scrolled briefly, then paused it. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. I snapped a photo as Merriman turned to leave, visibly shaken. Lisette didn't follow. She stood there for a long time before hailing a cab and disappearing uptown. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was sipping beer. Report. He said. I handed him the photo. She showed him something. He didn't like it. Excellent. Wolfe said that means he knows what he's lost, which is control by evening. Wolfe was ready. He dictated letters to 3 senior Remsen partners outlining financial irregularities linked to Marmon. He included the Cloverdale Holdings discrepancy citing Darrell's corroboration. Then as a final touch, He included a sentence that made me raise my eyebrows. We advise internal resolution. Within 48 hours to avoid external inquiry, a threat elegantly packaged as a courtesy at 9:22 p. And the brownstone phone rang. Wolfe let it ring 5 times before. Nodding to me, I picked up. "This is Goodwin." A pause, then "Tell Wolfe I'll come in tomorrow, 10 sharp." It was. Merryman, I relayed the message. Wolfe didn't smile, but I knew the trap had been set now. It was just a matter of Wow would walk into it first, at precisely 9:59 a. On Wednesday, the brownstone braced itself. Wolfe, never one to rush, had declared 10 o'clock sharp for the gathering of all interested parties. He meant it. Anyone arriving late would be barred entry, and anyone arriving early would wait in the front room. Under my supervision, and under Fritz's icy-glare, the stage was set, chairs arranged with surgical precision around Wolfe's disc water glasses, exactly 3/4 full blinds. Half closed against the late morning sun, Wolfe sat in his throne, flanked by stacks of indexed files that, while mostly decorative, created an atmosphere of inevitability. They came a summoned first. Gerald Dorrell, still wearing his well-buffed gilt, like an accessory next let veil, composed, but colorless, her usual gloss dulled at Theges. Then Calvin Stowe, shoulders slumped, sweat already forming at Hischerline, last fashionably, of course. Ashar Marmon, suited in gray, eyes alert and calculating. He paused briefly in the doorway, scanning the room like a man stepping into a chess game he wasn't sure he could win. Wolfe didn't rise. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Please sit. We're Goodwin. You may begin the recorder." I clicked the button on the small digital recorder. Wolfe kept for occasions such as these. The room fell silent save for the soft hum of the air vent and the faint sound of stoked breathing, like a man in a panic attack. "With good posture you are rare," Wolfe said, "because something rotten has taken root in the fertile soil of Remsen and Greevy, not embezzlement in the traditional sense, not theft by hands and tills, but theft by manipulation, data oversight, trust." Header to Marmon. M.R. Marmon, you initiated a system of false oversight involving Giscriani portfolios. You routed investment flow through cloaked shell accounts, Cloverdale Holdings being the most prominent, then had those reports filtered through channels that could not flag the irregularities, for that's absurd. Marmon said, voice calm. "You're not an auditor." "No," Wolfe replied. "I am a man with information provided by those you used." He nodded. Actual Mr. Dorrell confirmed that risk evaluations were falsified and that you maintained full control of account visibility. In exchange, you offered upward mobility and silence. Darrell flinched. He said it was temporary, just to stabilize post-COVID outflows. Then he expanded it. By the time I understood how far it had gone, you were implicated, Wolfe said, and so you continued until Claire Drimple found the trail. Merryman smiled faintly. Miss Dalrymple was dismissed. "For cause, yes," Wolfe said, "because you needed her gone. She had the original metadata, tracing those falsified files to your own clearance code. When that wasn't enough, you attempted to intimidate her with messages, trespasses, even physical intrusion into this very house." He held up the folded saffron note. "A mistake," Wolfe said, "one that revealed desperation, not confidence." Letta shifted. "I never agreed to that," she said. "I thought I was smoothing out inconsistencies for quarter-litisclers you were," Wolfe said, "but those inconsistencies had names, clients, Tredesio, redacted language in internal memos that Claire was tasked with reviewing under the impression they were drafts. In fact, they were final." She turned to Marmon. "You told me they were drafts." Marmon didn't respond. Wolfe's gaze settled on Stowe. And you, Mr. Stoked, Yao accessed systems beyond your clearance, planted data in a compliance officer's car, and delivered a warning inside this home at 247A. Precisely why I didn't want Tosto. Said he made it clear if I didn't help cover the gaps, I'd lose everything: my clearance, my work, my career. You were being watched. Wolfe said you knew it, but you also knew you were being used. Stu's voice cracked. I just wanted out. Then tell the truth, Wolfe. Said Stowe. Nodded Shacky. He used legacy access codes, ones we thought were deactivated. He spoofed and Beatric. Credentials mine Claire's. The shell accounts were buried under legitimate client names, so they looked like derivatives, but the returns he was siphoning returns to fund high-risk positions off books. Then he'd crash the holding, wipe the trail, and distributeth losses. Wolfe turned back to Marmon, and when Miss Drimple's scrutiny drew too close, you planted the breadcrumb, the baguette, an article delivered in a manner that would appear anonymous, but had specific internal connotation. Ridiculous. Marmon said no. Wolfe replied, you used Calvin Stowe as your courier. You accessed our kitchen to send a direct message, and when that failed, you fired Claire, thinking it would remove her leverage. He tapped the desk twice. Unfortunately for you, Miss Dalrymple made a printed copy, one that I now possess alongside Stowe's complete testimony, and a duplicate of the thumb drive you attempted to intercept through your courier. He turned to me. Mr. Goodwin. He rose and handed a manila folder to each person in the room. Insedi transcripts, metadata, visual evidence. Doral pulled, let exhaled sharply. Merriman finally lost composure. This is speculative. He snapped. You think Thebord will believe the word of a fired officer, a panicked junior analyst, and a private investigator who lives in Applant Museum? No, Wolfe said, but they'll believe you did not act when inconsistencies were flagged. They'll believe you used altered audits, and they will believe that the internal login on every manipulated account point back to one source. He let it hang there. Marmon stood. I want a lawyer. Excellent, Wolfe said. You'll need two. The meeting dissolved shortly after Doral left, quickly mumbling apologies no one requested. Let lingered long enough to mutter he lied to everyone before vanishing into a cab. Stowe simply sat there silent until I helped him to the door and told him not to speak to anyone until Wolfe gave the word. Claire arrived just after lunch. She entered quietly, stood in the office doorway, and said, It's done. Wolfe looked up it as she approached the desk, placed both hands on its edge. I didn't think you'd actually pull it off, she said. I rarely concern myself with what people expect. Wolfe replied, only with what they do. Shesmo, the tired, genuine thing. I owe you no. Wolfe said, lifting a finger. You owe yourself. You kept the trail, you kept the truth, and the others. Merriman will face internal and external scrutiny. Dole will cooperate. Miss Vale will distance herself, and Mr. Stowe will likely become a whistleblower. In some HR-mandated ethics workshop, Claire turned to leave. One more thing. Wolfe said. She stopped. Why the baguette, he asked. She smiled. It wasn't my thing. Calvin did it. He said he wanted to warn me, but couldn't talk. Who remembered once I brought in bread from Le Flaner, said it was symbolic. I never told him where I got it, but he remembered. Wolfe nodded. Indeed, symbolism, the last refuge of the inarticulate, but also the first language of the guilty. She left. Wolfe turned to me. Mr. Goodwin Hesed, have Fritz prepare something suitable for celebration, no for digestion. I loathe sentiment on an empty stomach. I stood. Saffron's back by Thieway. Fritz found it back where it belonged, of course. Wolfe said they want us to know they were here, that they failed. He leaned back, and that they learned something very important about symbols and about me by the time the dust settled in the office. The sun was low in the sky, casting long slanted beams through the Venetian blinds like searchlights catching a man on the run. Merriman hadn't technically fled, but he might as well have. He left behind a scorched trail. Financially, professionally. And, if Wolfe's assessment was correct, morally Wolfe waited until evening to deliver his full explanation, not because he liked the drama of it, but because the orchids came first. He disappeared upstairs at 40 minutes, and 1 second sharp returned at 6K, and only then called me into the office for what I've come to think of as the speech, the part where fog lifts and every breadcrumb suddenly connects, even the ones you didn't realize were there. He sat with this glass of beer in one hand and a small stack of papers in the other. Archie, he began, the nature of this affair is not simply deceit. It is orchestration. Merriman's crime was not in the numbers, but in the manipulation of people. His brilliance, if we may call it that, was psychological. I sat across from him, notebook open, but barely necessary. He understood that financial institutions like governments and churches are matter of perception. Risk is not a number, it's a feeling. And if you control the feeling, you can reshape the facts. So he rewrote the risk. I said yes. Wolfe nodded. He began with marginal accounts portfolios that were underperforming, but had many malverses. He diverted their capital into shell entities under false pretenses, derivative models, to pad the losses, and redistributed gains selectively to maintain the illusion of success. Clovertal Holdings was the most egregious, but there were others. And the internal reviews I asked Claire initiated on. But Merriman had already compromised the system. He rewrote the oversight logs, manipulated timestamps, and pierced Calvin Stowe's backdoor scripts to erase the digital footprints. However, he held up a finger. He underestimated Stowe's paranoia. The boy was too clever to leave without a trace. When he realized what he'd become part of, he panicked. But he also couldn't come forward, so he left a symbol, the baguette. I said, yes. Wolfe replied, crude, but effective. It told Claire she was in danger, and it told you that someone inside was still trying to resist. He tapped at the paper in front of him. When Claire received that stock article with the baguette, it was not just a warning, it was a cipher that specific trades mentioned in that article tied directly to Cloverdale. The implication was clear. Look here. And she did? But why the saffron? I asked. Wolfe followed himself a rare smirk to signal escalation after Claire did not retreat. Marmon needed to reassert control. He sent Stowe again, not just to threaten Mudo. Challenge the removal of the saffron was an intrusion. Yes, but it was also a signature. Merriman was showing us he could enter our world, our sacred world, and disturb its order. He set the beer down. But that was his mistake, because it revealed that he was watching us as closely as we were watching him. They frowned. You think Marmon came into the brownstone himself? No. Wolfe said he sends stoked, but Marmon orchestrated it, and more importantly, he assumed it would rattle us into silence, which only made you hungrier. I said exactly. He passed me a sheet of paper, a list of transactions, dates, and initials. The initials repeated in a pattern. JRM. Claire kept this printed, not digital, a relic of caution and proof of intent. It was her lifeline, and Merriman never found it. I nodded, so he fired her, thinking he'd erased all evidence. Yes, but he didn't account for Wolfe. That was my cue and veil. I asked, where does she land in all this? Peripheral. Wolfe said she was manipulated. Her edits gave Merriman cover, but she was never part of the financial misdirection. Her guilt lies in ignorance and perhaps vanity. Folded the papers and slid them into a drawer. Doral is another matter. He nibbled Merriman not by malice, but by ambition. His silence bought him a second chance at a career, and he took it when he realized the depth of the deception. Froze, but he flipped because we offered him what Merriman could not, a way out. I leaned back, exhaled. So where does that leave Stowe? And Wolfe said, but valuable. He will be subpoenaed. He will testify, and he may even survive it. If his conscience doesn't eat him first. There was a silence then, not awkward boot heavy, with the knowledge that this particular chess match was over Wolfe finished his birayu. No, I said, I'm still not over the fact that all this started with Baguette symbolism. Wolfe said when language fails, symbols remain, and Marmon understood that too well. He stood stretched slightly and glanced. Toward the kitchen dinner, Fritz is making. Bill Wolfe grunted with mild approval. I trust the saffron has been restored. Back in place, guarded like the crown jewels. Good. He stepped toward the door. One more thing, I said. Did you ever think Claire might have been in over her head? Wolfe paused. Of course, he said, which had the most essential quality for enduring exposure: clarity. She saw through the fog, and when she couldn't speak, she still acted. That is the difference between integrity and merely having a resume. With that, he left the office. I sat for a moment longer, listening to the sound of Fritz clattering pans in the kitchen and the faint rustle of orchids. Breathing in their upstairs temple case, closed, and not with a gunshot or a corkroom, but with quiet evidence, well-placed pressure, and one very annoyed genius. And yes, it started with a baguette. That's the part I'll remember most. If you ask Nero Wolfe, order is not restored by justice. Justice is a variable, sometimes swift, sometimes blind, occasionally. Deaf order to Wolfe is something more precise. It's the return of silence after intrusion, the soft sacred rhythm of routine, orchids blooming without threat, beer poured at the exact right temperature, no visitors, no clues, no bread-based puzzles. By Thursday, the brownstone was breathing. Game Claire Dalrymple had retained counsel, one of those sharpied women who wore gray suits and carried a moral code. Like a concealed weapon, Wolfe had referred her discreetly, not as a gesture of sentiment, of course, but as a practical consequence of professional alignment. That's how he described it. I translated it as he respects her, a rare category that included maybe 4 people in the world and 3 types of mustard. Saul Panza's notes had been delivered to the district attorney's office by courier, along with a confidential transcript of Marmon's dealings. No fanfare, no headlines, just the slow, inevitable turning of wheels. Remsen and Greevy would settle privately. Merriman would be made redundant strategically, and perhaps legally. Dorrell had been offered immunity in exchange for testimony. Stoked by some miracle, had been moved to an internal research role from servers, and Temptation Lact was staying on. Polished, promoted, and permanently rattled Claire came by once more, briefly, quietly. She didn't say much, just thanked Wolfe with a look, then me out loud. She brought a gift too, a sealed box from Le Flaner, tied with gold ribbon. Just bread, she said. No messages. Ipromise. I opened it after she left. A perfectly baked baguette wrapped in linen. No newspaper, no innuendo, just something warm, simple, and mercifully non-symbolic. We didn't tell Wolfe. He would have made a remark about redundancy and ritual. But later, I saw him take a slice, slather it with herbed butter, and chew it slowly, like he was tasting a resolution. That night, over dinner, Wolfe was in rare form. Fritz had gone all out with the bouillabaisse, restored with the newly recovered saffron. It was rich, fragrant, alive with depth. Wolfe murmured approval between spoonfuls, and I sat back waiting for the inevitable flourish, his closing statement. Heispelag, his epic on human failure. It came as it always did after the last bite. He pushed his bowl slightly away and folded his hands on the tablecloth. Deception, he said, is not confined to lies. It thrives in omission and implication, in silence. What Mary demanded was not just criminal, it was structural. He created a framework of trust and hollowed it from within. Thetis, the most insidious kind of theft. He paused, and the most familiar. Fritz, treeing a dish nearby, glanced over Wolfe, ignored him in matters of appetite. Had continued. We trust implicitly our senses, our cooks, our traditions. But in financiers, in law, trust is fragile, and when broken it rarely splinters cleanly. It fractures everything it touched. He reached for his beer. Miss Dalrymple minded me of something I too often forget. He added that courage does not always row. Sometimes it merely refuses to step back. He took a sip that he said is worthy of admiration. And Saffron, I waited a beat, you know. I said you almost sound sentimental. I am not? He replied, of course not. You're just a man who nearly skipped lunch over a stolen spice jar. He grunted. And the orchids, I added. Let's not forget the great floral disturbance. Looked up. Do not mock that. Archie, one of the blossoms, has not recovered, neither has stoked precisely. He said after dinner we returned to our natural habits. Wolfe retired to the plant rooms to speak softly to living things that didn't lie, cheat, or fudge quarterly reports. I retired to my room, propped my feet up, and considered the great mystery of human behavior, the way people can sabotage an entire system and still convince themselves they were just doing their jobs. A few hours later, Wolfe called me back down. He was in the office reading something thick and ancient. Hadn't looked up. Do you regret it? He asked. The case? I said. He nodded. Not a bit. I said. We got justice or something close. We got the right people scared, had the decent ones cleared, even managed to save some bread along the way. Wolfe closed the book. Justice is accidental. He said structure is deliberate. Is that a quote? No, he said. It is dinner talking. I moved toward Theodore. Anything else, boss? Yes, have Fritz order more saffron, 2 jars. Doubling up symbolic redundancy, he said without smiling. I left him there surrounded by books, orchids, and silence. The brownstone had been disturbed. Yes, but it had also been defended. And when the dust cleared, Wolfe had done what he always did, sat, still listened hard, and I thought out of Arian in the room. All I did was chase Baguette's babysit suspects and do thug work. But hey, that's the job, and it beats selling bonds, you'd think. Fate, after all we'd been through, sabotaged spices, financial shadow puppets, and a parade of overpaid suspects, the end would come with trumpets or a round of applause. But this is Wolfe's world. Justice, when served properly, arrives not with a bang, but with a clink of cutlery, a cool beer, and a few well-chosen words that pin a man's soul to the wall. Without raising Wolfe a single inch from his chair, was Friday afternoon. The brownstone had settled back into its rightful rhythm. The air was seasoned with civility again. No more late-night trespasses or urgent phone calls about vanishing auditors. Marmon was under formal investigation, and while the firm hadn't made a public statement, word from Lon Cohen at the Gazette was that an internal restructuring was coming down the pike, and no one named Marmon was expected to survive. Claire Dahl, Rimpless, still employed in spirit, if not on paper, had begun consulting for another firm. One ethics, compliance ethics, that rarest of Wall Street commodities. I told her that if she could sell it wholesale, she'd retire by next year. The last of the paperwork had been filed, and Wolfe was in his way at Peace Orchids. Above, saffron replenished below, and no trace of Calvinstowe in his kitchen. Even Fritz had recovered. He made a duck low range that night. So transcendent, Wolfe uttered a Latin proverb after the third bite. That's as close as he gets to joy. We're retired to the office. After dinner, Wolfe sipped his beer and read the Gazette while I tried to decide whether to ask the question that had been bugging me out with it. He said without looking up, fine. I said, it's this Merriman thing. I get the embezzlement, I get the shell accounts, but I still don't get why he went to the trouble of spooking Claire instead of just letting her get herself fired the old-fashioned way, quietly, bureaucratically. Why risk theatrics? Wolfe flowered the paper because he said Merriman was not interested in mere concealment. He wanted domination. He wanted her to know she was vulnerable. People like Merriman believe in fear as an asset class. Still seems like a lot off-foot just to prove a point. Archie, he said, in his world, fear was a resource. By frightening her, by forcing her to feel watched, he hoped she would act rationally. Files speak out, too loudly overplay her hand. But she didn't know she came to me, which is precisely why he lost. I nodded. And Stowe will recover eventually. What about Let? She will rewrite the narrative, topless herself, just outside the blast radius. He said it is what publicists do, leaned back in the chair, savoring the quiet. The great error, he added, was assuming she would fall apart under pressure. But Miss Dalrymple demonstrated a rare instinct mesoredfiance when people are stripped of institutional cover. They reveal their true alignment, she aligned. With principle, I smirked. That's the Wolfe seal of approval, isn't it? And he granted. I rose to leave, paused at the door, and turned. You know this one started with bread. Yes, he said. Ended with saffron. We could open a deli. He waved a hand. Enough, Archie. You'll ruin the silence. Sure, I said, stepping into the hallway. Wouldn't want to disturb the ecosystem. And he stopped, turned back. One last thing, he sighed. Must there always be one? Yep, if Merriman had succeeded, really succeeded, what do you think he would have done with the money? Wolfe looked up. Nothing. He said men like him do not steal to spend, they steal to own. That was it. That was the line, the one that would echo back when I remembered Thewhole twisted thing. He didn't need fireworks. He just needed truth. I left Fiend with his beer, his orchids, and his disdain for nearly everyone. The brown stone had once again absorbed the chaos of the outside world and spat it back with elegance and disdain. And me, I went upstairs, poured myself a bourbon, and wrote down everything because someone has to.